to see everyone. So, I don't see Brother Dan. Brother Dan, are you here tonight? Well, I was going to brag on him. His 8-track sales have tripled in the last week. Unfortunately, the sales are 0, and mathematics is a bit cruel, so 3 times 0 is still 0. But it's all about the marketing, right? So be sure you tell him I continue to plug his wonderful singing voice. Thank you for that song. Thank you for that song. I don't know where you have. That was wonderful. So if you got your Bibles tonight, sort of the verse that we've been using for this Get Ready series is 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 15. And this is where we really, it's the primary apologetics verse that most people use. But it tells us, but sanctify the Lord God in your hearts and be ready. So this is what it's telling us, be ready. So we need to get ready to do something. And it says to give an answer or an apologetic to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you, and to do it with meekness and fear. So that's been our verse for this series. And just for those, by way of review, for those that this is your first night here, apologetics comes from the word apologia, which simply means speaking in defense. It's a legal term. And in this context, we're applying it to the Christian faith. So speaking in defense of our faith. And we really summarize what apologetics is. It's really 3 things. It's knowing what you believe, knowing why you believe it, and then being able to share that and communicate that with others, whether it's friends, family, co-workers, whatever it is. So hopefully these 3 weeks have helped you at least understand the importance of this, and hopefully even more to help you maybe have some courage and to be able to share this with others. But tonight's message, a little different, like everything I do. 2 things are alike. We're going to title this one, Without Excuse. Without excuse, the existence and foundational nature of God. Before we continue, I really just want to again thank the pastor and the church for this opportunity. This really is one of the great honors of my life to be able to do this series. So thank you for the trust and for showing up and for your attentiveness. But really want to talk about the existence of God. Some of you may think this is a trivial or silly question, but it's not, for the society we live in especially. Does God exist? Now you understand why skeptics would, on the surface, unbelievers would ask this question, is because that much like I see these young men and ladies down here, I can say I know you exist because I physically see you. So they're thinking in very temporal terms of, well, I can't see him, I can't audibly hear him, therefore I don't know that he exists. So that has led for many, many years to a belief that he doesn't. Over two centuries ago, Ludwig Feuerbach famously wrote, "It's not as in the Bible that God created man in his own image, but on the contrary, man created God in his own image." So that, as we talked about last week, the belief is that we created God to explain things we didn't understand, the weather, bad things in our life, to give us something to pray to for good crops, all kinds of things. You can think of it as the God of the gaps. It's often how it's referred to. But I want to point to this verse here specific tonight. Romans chapter 1 and verse 20. Very, very key verse for us. "For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." Now that phrase, without excuse, is also translated from the word apologia, where we get apologetics. So what it's telling us is that the evidence of God is seen, so much so that it says it's clearly seen. And it tells us that it's so clearly seen, if you stand before God and say, "Sorry, you didn't give me enough evidence that you exist," it says that you will be without an excuse. You will be without a defense at that point. So the Bible is very clear that there is enough evidence that God exists all around us. Now, Arthur C. Clarke, science fiction author, I think this was a profound statement, especially for an unbeliever. He said, "There are 2 possibilities. Maybe we're alone, maybe we're not. Both are equally frightening." Very powerful statement. Because what we're talking about is our worldview. No 2 people in this room have the exact same worldview. Now, your worldviews may be grouped because of your your belief or your family, but really everything from where you were raised, how you were raised, what language you spoke, what food you ate, all of the variables that are in your life make up you. You're this big equation of all of these things. So how you view the world, think of it as not as physical glasses, but this mental and spiritual set of glasses that you look at the world with. That's your worldview. And Arthur C. Clarke says, you know what, there's really two big worldviews here. Either we're alone or either we're not. And both of those are terrifying to think of. And when we think how this is applied to mankind and the questions that we have to answer, what's our origin? What's our meaning? Why are we here? How do we define right and wrong? Morality? What's our destiny? These are really big questions, and you're going to answer them differently based on your worldview. So, for example, Stephen Jay Gould was a Harvard biologist. He's dead now, but famously said, humans are a fortuitous cosmic afterthought, a tiny little twig on the enormously arborescent bush of life. Basically, you were an accident, just in history. And that if you ran it all through again, it wouldn't happen the same way. Or as this textbook from the 90s said, you are an animal and share a common heritage with earthworms. What will that do for your self-esteem? Those of you who've been fishing with worms, you understand that. Charles Darwin, what's the purpose in life? What's the meaning? He said a person can have for his rule of life, as far as I can see, only to follow those impulses and instincts which are the strongest or which seem to him the best one. See, because if there's no God, do whatever feels good to you, okay? Because you don't have to answer for it. See how your worldview changes how you act? What about where are we going? The afterlife. Well, this is famous atheist Richard Dawkins on a bus in Europe where they're saying, you know what, there's probably no God, so stop worrying and enjoy your life. I don't know why my belief in God suddenly makes me worry. I think they're the ones worried because they don't want him to exist. But they're basically saying, we don't think there's an afterlife, so we don't think you should worry about it. And that's why atheists can make statements like this, where they say, smile, there's no hell. So there's no fear of the afterlife, of judgment at all. And you contrast this with how a Christian views the world. According to Scripture, Jeremiah 1:5, God knows us before we were formed in the belly of our mother. That has profound impact into how we view life, the value of life. When does life begin? Profound. Genesis 1:27 says that he created us in his own image. He took that kind of care. Revelation 4:11 tells us that we're created for his pleasure. Specific purpose there. 1 Corinthians 6:20, for you are bought with a price, therefore glorify God. Some of you in here, you like buying and selling things. How many of you are that way? It's just in your DNA. Okay? I'm not real good at that. I get ripped off all the time, I think. But a lot of you will say, you know what, something's only worth what somebody's willing to pay for it, right? What are you worth? What price was paid for you? See, in the Christian world, your value is immeasurable because the creator of the universe died on a cross for you. You see how you view things differently? Hebrews 9:27 tells us it's appointed unto men once to die, but after this, the judgment. Very, very different perspective. So your worldview is going to directly influence how you view ourselves, others, your environment. It's that important how you answer the question, does God exist? Proverbs 23:7, very, very powerful little phrase in that verse. For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. So is he. Kip Kinkle, back in the 90s, killed his parents and shot 27 students in Springfield, Missouri. He wrote in his diary, there is no God, only hate. There in the middle is Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, famous for the Columbine massacres. Harris wore a white shirt. Most people don't realize it. The white shirt he had on said natural selection when he committed the murders. On the right-hand side there is Pekka Erik Aavanen from Finland, murdered several of his students. His shirt there says, humanity is overrated. So you see how their worldview is impacting their actions. Very, very, very malleable minds, influential points in their life. How you approach the topic of abortion is going to be based on your worldview. When you look at people that just so violently fight for abortion, you understand why they think that way. Their worldview is that different. And just a shameless plug, several years ago I wrote a small booklet on, I called it Darwin's Empty Cradle, which is about the evolutionary justification of abortion. I've put 50, 75 copies out there on the visitor's desk for free. If you want one, go by and get it. If they're gone, let me know and I'll bring you one. You'll notice that it's a few years old because I have more hair in the picture on the back. So, how do we view our environment, the animals? We often make fun of PETA, right? People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, and we all have our own funny acronyms that we make fun of them. But when you understand that their motto is a rat is a pig, is a dog, is a boy, what they're telling you is there is a moral equivalency between a rat and a pig and a dog and a boy. Because they don't think that humans have any more value or any less value than any other living thing. So that's why they act the way they do, because of their worldview. It impacts how we view sin, pain, suffering, even marriage. This is so fundamental. How do you answer that question? Does God exist? Well, that Romans chapter 1 and verse 20 tells us not only is it clearly seen, but it said it can be understood by the things that are made. That's us. It's telling us we've got the ability to understand. And I can honestly tell you, I've spent 25 plus years, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to understand what God has done. And I love that. God just wired me that way. I love it. And I have spent a lot of time even looking at the creation myths of other cultures. And I'll tell you, Christianity stands out unique among all the rest, just in one simple thing. For the Chinese, for example, they say that their creator God, Fan Ku, he came from an egg. So an egg hatched and God came out, and then he became the creator. The Sumerians said that their first two gods came out of water. The Egyptians, Atum-Ra, their creator, came out of water. Their gods always came out of something. But the God of the Bible says, in the beginning, God. He preceded everything else. The only belief system in the world that has a God that did not come from something else. Now, skeptics will often ask the question, who created God? Well, their question assumes something. They're assuming a created God. We don't worship a created God. That's the fundamental difference that they struggle with. See, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. It says in the beginning, which means time. God created time. He was before time. There was no such thing as before he created time. And what's really neat is that he also created space when it says that he made the heaven. And he also made matter, stuff, when he made the earth. I don't know if God's just showing out here, but in Romans chapter 1 and 20 it says not only can you clearly see his creation, it tells us one of the things you can see is his eternal power and Godhead. Is he trying to show us something about himself in his creation? You've got time, space, and matter, three things in the beginning of creation. And what's neat about those three things is that they don't exist separate, they're in a continuum. That's a big fancy word that basically means that one of them cannot exist without the other two. They're that intertwined. So for example, in the universe, it's not like it's 1/3 time, 1/3 space, and 1/3 matter. It doesn't work that way. It's all time. It's all space. It's all matter. I'm going to stretch your brain a little bit tonight. Everybody awake? I know you had a hard day at work. We're going to stretch it a little bit. So here's a question. If you had matter with no space, where would you put it? Did you get that, brother? I know you're a Red Sox fan. I just want to make sure. I'm just picking on you. I couldn't pick on Kurt because the Cubs lost last night. So, sorry to bring that up, brother. If you had matter with no time, when would you put it? That makes your head hurt a little bit, right? They're intertwined. They're in a continuum. Now, I'll get this question. Wait a minute. How can three things completely make up something and still be one? Because 1 plus 1 is 3, right, math teacher? Did I get that right? I'm on there, right? Well, see, they're getting their math a little wrong because 1 times 1 times 1 is what? It's 1. See how mathematics is so beautiful? You can have 3 ones and still get 1. And even in each of them, you look at time, it has 3 parts: past, present, and future. You look at space, it has 3 dimensions: height and width and depth. You look at matter, it comes in 3 states: solid, liquid, and gas. A trinity of trinities, all in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1. I think God's just showing out. He did it in 10 words. What do you think's in the rest of the Bible? You can spend your whole life digging into this Bible and only scratch the surface of it. Absolutely amazing what's in there. But some people say, well, prove God to me. Well, when you use the term prove or proof, now you're getting into legal and mathematical disciplines. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. You cannot prove God. He's not a math equation that you can put on a chalkboard. But neither can the skeptic prove that he doesn't exist. It's a stalemate. Okay? You cannot prove either way. But there are defined fingerprints that tell us that God does exist. And we're going to look at 4 of them tonight and walk them more from an abstract down into something that's a little more personal. So, first one is the cosmological fingerprint. Has to do with the creation, universe coming into existence. And there's a law that's well recognized. It's called the law of causality. And that simply says if you have something that has a beginning, then it has a cause. You have a beginning. What was the cause? Your biological parents. Okay? What was their cause? Their biological parents. And you can go back and back and back and back and say the cause of everything ultimately comes to something they call the first cause. Now, in the 1960s, scientists discovered something amazing. And it was the cosmic microwave background radiation. But basically, they discovered that the universe had a beginning. Scientists, it's fully accepted now. The universe had a beginning. Now, there's disputes on how long ago it was, how it happened. There's a lot of disputes. But nobody disputes that it had a beginning. And many of the skeptics at the time fought it greatly because they knew what that meant. Because if you have a beginning, then you have to start talking about the cause of the beginning. And it was so much so that the most well-known atheist of that time, Anthony Flew, began to doubt his own skepticism. So much so that in 2003, he actually signed the Humanist Manifesto. The following year, he declared that he believed that there was a God. All because he said, you know what? When I realized that it had a beginning, I have to start thinking about what produced the beginning. And he realized there was a God. So I'm gonna mess with your brain a little bit, okay, if I can borrow it just briefly. So philosophers and physicists, here's how they describe the first cause. Because they'll look at our universe and they'll say, based on the universe, this is what we think the first cause is like. Okay? They say since matter began to exist at the moment of creation, then matter's cause must be non-physical. Since space itself came into existence at the beginning, space's cause must be spaceless. Since time began at the beginning, time's cause must be timeless. Since change is a product of time, whatever caused time must be changeless. And number 5, since the immense amounts of energy and matter comprise the universe, whatever created energy and matter must be unimaginably powerful. Now, in all honesty, raise your hand. How many of you said, I have no idea what you just said? Be honest. You're in church. God sees you. He sees you outside of church too. I'm going to do it again and soften the language. Instead of the first cause, let's say the Creator. What are the traits of the Creator? If the Creator made matter, He can't be made of matter. You understand that? If I invented Legos, I can't be made of Legos, right? You understand? John chapter 4 and verse 24 says God is a spirit. Second trait of that Creator, if the Creator made space, He cannot be inside of or limited by space. You with me? 1 Kings 8:27, but will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, the heaven and heaven of heavens cannot contain thee. How much less this house that I have built it. Time, He must be outside of time. 2 Peter 3:8, one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. I think we as Christians get a little weird in this verse, to be honest. We like quoting the first half and not the second half. When you look at both of those halves, it says a day feels like 1,000 years and 1,000 feels like a day. You know why? Because there's no time where God is at. The fourth one, if the Creator is outside of time, He doesn't change, because inside of time, everything changes. There's a before and after. Do you know you just changed? You just changed again. You just changed again. You just got older. You just got older. Isn't that depressing to think about? Oh my. Malachi 3:6, for I am the Lord, I change not. You can only say that if you're outside of time. And the last one, if the universe contains immense amounts of energy, the Creator's got to be even more powerful than that. Jeremiah 32:17, Ah, Lord God, behold, thou hast made the heaven and the earth by thy great power and stretched out arm, and there is nothing too hard for thee. So what we know about the Creator of the universe without even naming Him is that He's non-physical, spaceless, timeless, changeless, and powerful. The God of the Bible checks every box. I think it's Him. Second thing, teleological, which basically means, teleos means design. And some of the teenagers here, those that go to the school, you've heard a little bit of this before. But William Paley famously wrote a couple hundred years ago about the watch. He said, you know what, if you're walking out in a field or you're walking on a beach and you find a watch, you pick it up, you don't assume that it just naturally came to be because of wind and waves and everything else. You assume that there is a watchmaker when you find a watch. Or you can say if you find a painting, you know there's a painter, okay? Paint just didn't jump on a canvas one day by itself. If you see a building, you automatically know that there's a builder. Now, you don't have to teach kids this. They're wired to recognize that. And if there's a creation, that automatically tells you there is a creator. You have to teach someone not to see this. Because we naturally come into the world being able to identify those things that are created versus those things that are natural. And I like using the giraffe, okay? Teenagers, you remember the giraffe, right? Okay. I love giraffes, mainly because they have awesome tongues, okay? It is. If you ever go to the zoo and you get to feed the giraffes, do it. My oldest daughter did it when she was 3. I think she had nightmares for a week. That thing is that long. It's black. It's awesome. They can take it and wrap it around a carrot, okay? Isn't that insane? But you got to realize they can't take their legs and like feed themselves, so you have to, never mind, you'll get that later tonight. Neat thing about a giraffe is that it's long neck. That's what we identify it by. And the heart and the brain are quite a distance away. Well, that's an issue because your heart pumps the blood, and in the blood is the oxygen, and it goes up to your brain. Okay, so it's got a long distance to travel. So God had to design the giraffe with a very large heart. It's 2 feet wide and weighs about 25 pounds. Okay? This is a massive pump in a fully grown giraffe, 18 foot tall giraffe, 17 to 18 foot. Now, there's a problem. If you ever watch giraffes drink, they look like an awkward teenager, okay? Because they're, you don't know where the elbows and the knees go. But when the giraffe gets a drink of water, Now, that massive pump is working with gravity. So you imagine when you go to pick something up on the floor, some of you, you get a head rush. Well, imagine with something with that kind of a pump. So when that happens, massive head rush, so much force, not joking, it can kill the giraffe. He can blow his brains out, okay, by just getting a drink of water, okay? And millions of years of evolution, giraffes have just been blowing their brains out getting a drink of water. No, they haven't. See, and here's where it gets so amazing. You see, God designed in the giraffe little valves all throughout its neck. So whenever it leans down to get a drink of water, it cuts off the plumbing. So it can lean down and get it, and it doesn't blow its brains out. But there's a little bit of a distance right past the last valve and the brain. There's enough there that it can damage the blood vessels at the base of the brain. So God designed a little sponge to sit at the base of the brain of the giraffe to catch that last little bit of blood so it doesn't hurt it. Okay? And of course it gets its drink of water and it's fine. But now we got a problem. The lion is coming to eat it. Okay? So it's got the valves, no blood's coming to the brain right now. It stands up really fast like some of you and it falls over. No, not really. That's how giraffes sleep, by the way. If you ever sneak up on when they're sleeping, what do you do with a neck like that? You just, all right? Well, that's what they have to do. But you imagine this is a problem because if you're drinking and you raise up, you're going to get eaten before you can get things undone and move. Okay? But here's also where it's so amazing. That little sponge that caught that last bit of blood, when they raise up, it squeezes. And it puts enough blood in the brain for them to think clearly and allow all the valves to open so that they can go back full speed immediately. Does that not amaze you? Some of you in this crowd are engineers. And what I just described to you are engineering principles. Well planned out design. You can take every living thing in creation, include yourself, spend an hour studying it, and find out amazing features of design. God has given us thousands, hundreds of thousands of witnesses around us in living things. Plants, animals, people. Why do you think he asked us to study his creation? Because there's so much information there to share. We talk about Thomas Edison and how smart he was. He had over 1,000 U.S. patents. Very brilliant man. But I want you to realize, man's not as smart as we think we are because we reverse engineer and we steal other people's designs. It's called biomimicry. That's where we look at nature and see how God did it, and then we duplicate it. For example, simple one is flight. Now, you can debate on when man began flying, but I can tell you we learned how to do it by watching the birds, okay, with the wings. Any of you have driven on the road and see these really neat reflectors on the road? They call these things cat's eye reflectors. Have you ever come home, those of you who have a cat, and your headlights shine on them and you see those creepy little eyes? Okay? They design the reflectors with the same design, the reflective material that's in the back of a cat. Okay? It's the exact same approach. Some of you have this nice tread on the bottom of your shoes now. You know, that was invented. A guy was out walking his dog one day in the rain, and he comes back home, and he's slipping everywhere, and the dog's just fine. And he realized, look at the paw of that dog. It's got tread built into it. Some of you like chem lights, the cold lights. You ever seen those out on a July day? Lightning bugs. They ripped off the process from a lightning bug, a chemical luminescent product. Fiber optics, designed based on spider web traits. You've got some high-speed internet now because of a spider web. Those of you that have a cell phone and you can see it out on a bright day is because they figured out how light's reflected off the wings of butterflies. And it makes it very vibrant. Velcro. Any of you been out running through the woods and got these, they call them cockleburrs? I spent a fourth of my childhood taking those things out of my socks. I am not joking. I hated those things. The guy first, he invented Velcro after seeing how those worked. Suction cups. You ever seen those before in nature? Yeah. Octopus. Based on the same design. Job 37 says, "Hearken to this, O Job, stand still, consider the wondrous works of God." How do we miss this in society? How do we miss it? Skeptics walk by this every day, and they miss it, the wonderful evidence. The third thing, the axiological fingerprint. This has to do with the moral law. I'm starting to walk this in to be more personal. You see, skeptics and atheists, they like hijacking Christian terms. They'll often say, you don't, in this sign here in New York, you don't have to believe in God to be a moral or ethical person. Around Christmas, every year, the American Human Association puts out ads that says, "No God, no problem. Be good for goodness sake." I don't even understand what that means in an atheistic context. And here's why. Because if there is no God, and we are all a product of a mindless process called evolution, what's going on in your brain right now is just chemistry. That's all it is. There's no purpose, there's no design, it is just chemistry. Okay? Go home, shake up a soda can, okay? Open it up, a chemical reaction will occur. Is that chemical reaction right or wrong? Good or bad? Happy or sad? You're like, that doesn't even make sense. No. So how can you apply those terms to a chemical reaction? So why are the atheists using terms like good and bad, right and wrong, moral and evil? They'll often say, well, why didn't God stop the Holocaust? Well, if there is no God, the survival of the fittest, right? See, they always want to hijack Christian morality in this. And here's the proof of God in this. Because when an individual says that there's a right and a wrong, there's a good and evil, they are assuming that there is a standard against which you measure to determine what's right and wrong. You can think of it as an objective moral law. Hard question here. How do you know a line is crooked? Ladies, you can help your husband with this one. How do you know a line is crooked? It's because you know what a straight one looks like, right? You've got a standard. In the atheistic worldview, there is no standard to measure against. But they use terms that we use because we have a moral standard. Because as soon as you assume that there's an objective moral law, a way to determine right versus wrong, you have to then ask, who gave that moral law? Who defined it? Now, some skeptics will tell you they define their own right and wrong. And that my right and wrong may say that murder is correct and that abortion is correct and that all these bad things are correct, and yours may say that it's not, but you can stay out of mine because I'm the God of my own universe and I set my own rules. But they don't like that. They want to use these universal concepts of right and wrong. And here's why. This is why I think this is such an amazing proof of God's existence. Because Romans chapter 2, verses 14 and 15 says, "For when the Gentiles which have not the law do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto themselves." So why do unbelievers still have the concept of morality? Here it is. "Which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness." God created in the heart of every person a knowledge of His law, a knowledge of right and wrong. It says their conscience is telling them about it. Conscience means conscience, with knowledge. God gave every person in their heart a witness. That's why when you witness to someone, the Bible often tells you to work with that inner witness that they have. You hold the mirror up of the law. You help them to see that they're a sinner. It's because you have an ally inside of them that God designed. And He's real to them. And they're suppressing that knowledge. And then that leads lastly into the fourth divine fingerprint. And I think it's really experiential. It's personal. It's personal. Just serve a God that's distant, that He created a universe, he designed things, that He's this nameless being. We serve a God that revealed Himself in His Word and in His Son. He's a personal God who wants to have a relationship with us. So you ask the fundamental question, does God exist? I think for us here primarily tonight, those that are believers, I think the real question is do we live like God exists? And this is a question that hits me right between the eyeballs. This has been a hard week studying this one because I know the implications of it. Matthew chapter 15 and verse 8 says, "This people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth, and honoreth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me." I think we've got just as big of a problem in the world with atheists and skeptics. We have a bigger problem with people in the church that live like God doesn't exist. And this is hard. It's very hard. I call them atheistic Christians. It's a phrase I came up with. Somebody else has probably come up with it. But to me, an atheistic Christian is someone that talks about prayer, but they live like it's not needed. There's somebody who talks about God's word, but reads it less than man's word. And I've got a whole library of books at home. You got to realize that I'm preaching to me. They talk about witnessing, but show no concern for the lost. They talk about fearing God, but only fear man's opinion. We've got Christians that care about how many likes they get on their page more than they do how God views them. That worries me. That worries me a great deal. And there's a thought that God's been developing in my heart, and I don't know where God's going with it, but if you think of mankind being expelled from the Garden of Eden as a result of our sin and what it has been like for us ever since then, I used to see us more as a people who is trying to get that relationship back with God. I'm beginning to get a little cynical, and I'm wondering if maybe what we really want is to get back into Eden. We don't care about God as much. And that maybe our pursuits in life are about trying to rebuild Eden again and not that relationship. And that's hard. That's hard for me to say. I work a secular job. I mean, I want all the things in life that all of you want. But that's a hard lesson for us to learn. So we're finishing up early tonight. So if you get home late, it's on your own fault tonight. The pastor, I'll go ahead and have you come up. But I want to finish with this one thought. Really, for this whole get ready. You can have all the scientific facts and figures and be able to describe things eloquently, and you may be able to defeat a skeptic in a debate. You may be able to do all that stuff. But it's all about winning a person. It's about changing their life. To me, there is no greater apologetic than your life and the evidence of how God has worked for you. Because the skeptic can see you. They can see the evidence of God in you greater than they can anything else that I could teach or you could read in a book. So if you get nothing else this week, understand that you can be the greatest apologetic and witness to someone else. Pastor.